Thanks so much, Elliot, and good morning, everyone. Good to be with you, and tremendous to present with Kim Bancroft. What we're trying to do today is give you a roadmap based on a collaboration between Kim and I in various roles that she's held, and really the lessons and the do's and don'ts, if you like, of how to transition an organisation through a change from Safety 1 and through to Safety 2. What we're going to try and do is really in the next 50 minutes try and share with you our approach, our thinking in relation to rethinking safety, provide for you a roadmap for that transformation, and really give you some tips on how to do it. For me, there are three things that I want to get across in this presentation. Firstly, quite often it is the legal perspective that is said to be a hurdle for why you can't transition from Safety 1 to Safety 2. That really annoys me, and hopefully I'll share with you some examples why I think that point of view is just plainly wrong, and really there is no reason why law is in fact an obstacle to that transition. And secondly, actually, and more importantly, in many respects, from a practical perspective, taking a Safety 2 approach can assist you in relation to meeting your substantive legal obligations, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. And also, really, we want to leverage on the idea of the obligations that are imposed on boards in relation to due diligence as really an underpinning strategy for our approach. To get us started, Kim will outline the case for rethinking safety.
Excellent, thanks, Michael. So research has provided for us as safety professionals just a wonderful amount of principles and thinking that we can draw on. So most of you, I'm hoping most people in the audience will have heard of these principles here. And we have Eric Hognagel, who's already presented on this concept of Safety 1 and Safety 2. So drawing from that vast amount of work from Eric Hognagel, from Sidney Decker, from David Wood, David Proven, we have these principles which we can use now to take forward. And really simply, they're outlined in a number of ways. Is that, first of all, safety is not the absence of incidents. Safety is a positive state in its own right. So what this leads us to then think about safety not as the absence of incidents, but leading into adverse outcomes, but rather that this idea that it can mislead organisations into thinking that their systems operate safely despite underperforming and leading to complacency. And this is demonstrated for us in a number of different case studies: BP Texas City Refinery Explosion, Exxon, Piper Alpha, Deepwater Horizon, so on and so forth. So that can be quite a paradigm shift for people, that principle in its own right, but it's one worth, getting philosophical about and unpacking, and to think about, well, how does this actually play out in organisations? And there's a wealth of research there for us underpinning that particular principle. The second one says that we must stop thinking about workers as a problem to control. And I don't know about you, but if you look at how we talk about people in organisations, how our policies are written and the way they're pitched, it's often around this assumption that people are the problem to control, and it's the system that's perfect if it wasn't for those pesky people making errors. So the reframe on that, the paradigm shift on that, is that we can think about workers as a resource to harness, develop and get insight from. simply because they're the ones at the front of, they're at the front line of the operational work, of the risk, who are getting their job done day in and day out. So we can very much reframe workers. We have legislation around consultation and participation and collaboration underpinning this as well. So this is not something totally new to us, this idea that workers can deliver better safety outcomes when they're empowered to speak up and empowered to make that change. And then last of all, we can stop thinking about safety as an expense, as a cost, as a bureaucratic accountability to those upward. Rather, we can think about safety as capital. So an organisation, as Michael can definitely tell us, and as research tells us, an organisation with a large safety capital will have fewer incidents, increased productivity, reduced costs, and increased profits. Now, Michael, how have I done there? Is there anything you wanted to add to that in the way of the principles and how we can rethink safety a little bit differently?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to focus on the idea that you've planted there in relation to consultation. I mean, the reality is that the legal principles underpinning safety from the outset, and when I say in the outset, the modern safety legislation really has been framed around the 1970s in the UK and brought to Australia, have always recognised the need to put workers at the centre of safety. And really along the way, we've lost our compass. We've lost our direction. It's become, bureaucracy has been at the centre of safety rather than the workers themselves. So in many respects, actually seeing workers as a resource to harness is actually a return to the basics, to the fundamentals of what safety is about, and certainly what safety law has been about since the 1970s. So it's far from a radical concept, and I want to share that because I think a lot of what is said about the legal impediments and the reasons why safety can't be done is plainly wrong. Firstly, a lot of the perceived bureaucracies can often be underpinned by people saying it's a legal obligation. The law actually requires very little by way of bureaucracy. In actual fact, there is very little in record keeping requirements, for example, and that tends to be around health records and risks that have a long tail end, like hazardous chemical exposures, asbestos, lead, and the like. And really, for the most part, the administrative components of the legislation relate to consultation, keeping records of minutes, and sharing notices and displaying notices. A lot of myths have developed around the fact that everything has to be documented and that audits are a legal obligation. And there is a world of myths around the idea of JSAs. There's no legal requirement to develop a JSA, to have a JSA. JSA is not referred to anywhere in the legislation, Act regulations. There is a reference to safe work method statements. That reference is very narrow. It refers very specifically to construction settings and certain construction settings. And in fact, what passes as safe work method statements in the general community would not pass muster in relation to the legal obligation in relation to safe work method statements. So there's a complete disconnect in terms of folklore and bush lawyering that's going on, and the actual legal obligations. And fundamentally, what we're dealing with is something that is a piece of legislation that, for the most part, is substantive and is trying to ensure safety outcomes. And this will be a theme as we develop this presentation. The more that you recalibrate your approach back to safety outcomes, the closer you actually will be to legal obligations. With that, really over to you, Kim, in relation to the roadmap and how you see us developing them.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much, Michael. So if you were like me, when I first heard those principles that Michael has just introduced there and so eloquently put, it really was a significant paradigm shift for me. So the question really is then, how can you as a safety professional, regardless of your role, go about breathing life back into safety by operationalizing these principles? So having done this over the last 4 years, and Michael also having had extensive experience working with a number of different organizations, really simply, you need to marry the theory with the practical. So take this theory, these principles that Michael was just describing there, and interpret it for your business. But having said that, having a bit of a roadmap doesn't go astray, right? So that's what Michael and I are going to unpack today, is this one roadmap that works particularly well. Now, this roadmap was developed very, very loosely based on John Kotter's 8-step change model for change management. Now, of course, you can use any particular change model you like. There's other ones out there on the market like ProSide, but my suggestion would be is to have some kind of methodology underpinning it to at least, if not anything, just guide your way and give you some sort of framework to follow. So Michael and I have just picked out the essential steps. Of course, there's a few others there that you could add on in. Now, as we're talking about this roadmap and all of the things that you can do and the things to watch out for, all of the practical implications, you might be thinking, well, hang on a second. I'm not in a senior position here to influence the board or the executives, and that's okay. I would still encourage you to take this roadmap away and still put it into practice regardless of where you are in your business. So you might have a team that you lead. You might be a leader of a whole department. So whilst you don't need, whilst it's helpful to have, but you don't necessarily need the full sign-off from your executive and board, you could still, and this is a very technical term, you could still ninja it into your company, certainly taking some of the due diligence index and the learnings that we're talking about here today. So definitely don't let that put you off. So really simply, the roadmap that we've mapped out here, first of all, as John Green calls it, we suggest creating a compelling case for change, or having some kind of burning platform by which to leverage off. Second of all, setting the mandate for an evidence-based approach, or setting that blue sky vision to which you can work toward. Once you've got that mandate signed off by your board or executive, getting strategic with due diligence. Now, this is a very crucial part of the presentation today, and something we really want to emphasize through our takeaways here, and we'll explain why as we go through. Now, this then flows down to your tactical initiatives and tools for your teams and leaders to actually use on the ground day to day. That gives you a whole wealth of data that's really, really rich that you can bring together with the due diligence index. Now, once that's established and the due diligence index is up and running, it's getting more maturity and getting more traction, the information in it and the conversation that it creates will then keep feeding that loop. So, as you go through your strategy cycles, whether it's 2 or 3 years or longer, you can over time continue to reiterate that process. But that essential link there is that due diligence index, which keeps feeding that compelling case for change. So let's kick off. So Michael, if you could click onto that next slide, let's get started and stuck in with the first part of that roadmap there, that compelling case for change for stakeholders. So it's really important to make very, very clear for your leaders why we would be considering a strategic direction change. Some leaders have said to me, Kim, things are going well. Why would we even need to consider this? Why don't we just keep doing what we're already doing? So I think to pull together that case is absolutely imperative. Otherwise, you might get feedback not too dissimilar. So in creating a compelling case for change, one suggestion is to pull out all of your injury data, all of your claim costs, your lagging injury data, your lead metrics, if you have them, regardless of whether they're working very well or not. Pull all those out, your engagement survey data, any notifiables you've had, any safety meeting minutes, and your HR data. I would get all of that data together as much as you can, maybe go back 2-3 years, maybe longer. And I'd also include some kind of desktop review of the safety management system. So in the past, I've either done that myself or I've actually called Michael, and Michael's come in and done a great job for me. But some kind of review of the safety management system, and really consider how much impact the safety management system is having on your frontline workers and on day-to-day safety and on operational safety, sorry. So the kinds of questions you could be asking there is what are workers actually doing to keep themselves and others safe? Is that just something that they just organically do, or are they actually using components of the safety management system to inform that? What are the factors influencing these workers' behaviour? Is there a relationship between their actions and the elements of the safety management system, or does it just sit there on the shelf, so to speak, to get our ISO standards fulfilled? So they're the kinds of questions I'd be looking at in relation to your safety management system. I would also head out to the field and have as many conversations that I could in the time that I had, and really understand what frustrates people when it comes to health and safety. What are their goal conflicts? What are their trade-offs? What are their compromises that they take? How do they work around a degraded environment? How do they make things go well 99% of the time? What does success look like for these guys? So getting all of that data there, I would mix it all together and I'd do some kind of thematic analysis, which is really just a fancy term for pulling out all of the key themes and trends. And then I would start to weave in the research and the case law. I would then package that together, bundle that together in a business case, and I would take that to the board and executives and really spell out to them on why you should be adopting this new direction. Now, if you've done a robust and good job and thorough enough job, it should be a bit of a no-brainer for the business as to why we'd be doing this change. Now, in my experience, you'll get some pushback, and it's the usual suspects that will rear their head in the form of assumptions that are really strongly held. And the way we traditionally think about safety, that traditional safety paradigm. So some of those which might come up in that conversation that I think you should preempt would be the legal assumptions. So this is the assumption that says if we change anything at all in safety, if we do anything different, it will surely put us in a legally compromised position. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard that one. You might get an assumption that TRIFR and LTIFR, which are usually king in the boardroom, that they are the only and best metrics to predict our safety performance. And again, another common assumption, which we've touched on already, is that assumption around people, that inherently people are the problem to be controlled. So in building your compelling case for change, I would do my very, very best to present the evidence to challenge those assumptions. So that would help you move quickly from that vocab of control and deficit and fear and constraint to a narrative around empowerment and learning from what goes right and human opportunity and a human-centric approach to safety. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wow, that's an awful amount of work I have to do. So to make it easier for you, Michael's going to take us through some case law that you can incorporate into your case for change. And these slides will be available, so you don't have to sit there and take copious amounts of notes as Michael's talking. So over to you, Michael, to give us a little bit of a head start there on that compelling case for change with the case law.
Thanks, Kim. Throughout this, we're going to be talking about a number of cases and case studies, and these are two of my favourite cases. They're two cases that I've been personally involved in, so I know the ins and outs of this all too well. The first one I want to share with you, and I've got the case references there for those who are interested in making those comments. I think this is a learning for all of us, and it's not intended as a criticism of those two organisations. The first one involves a construction company that was involved in an incident which was ultimately in court in 2014, but actually occurred in late 2010, as often there's a lag between those two events. And the construction company, Buildcorp, was engaged to perform work on a residential owners corporation building to do some improvements and fit out and refurbishment work to that building. Building happened to be in Harris Street, Sydney, and they engaged subcontractors, as often is the case, Now Access and CNC Hoist to perform some of that work. CNH Hoist, their job was to install a hoist at that particular site. They got to a certain point in the installation of the hoist, and they couldn't commission it because the landing on level 7, where the hoist ended, was not completed at that point in time. So that subcontractor told the contractors on site that, look, the hoist is not ready yet for use. When you finish your part, we'll come back and commission it. Now, for those here who are involved in this conference, you would, of course, know that firstly, in order to use a hoist, it needs to be commissioned, and there needs to be a proper handover to use it. And then secondly, in order to actually operate it, you need to have a ticket to operate it. As it so happens, the workers on site decided to use the hoist, probably for convenience, and as they were lifting material from the bottom to bring it up, there was protruding material. The hoist toppled over, and its contents fell on one of the workers and struck him in the head. Now, I wouldn't be sharing this example if it wasn't for one thing, and that is that there was an extensive audit system and an extensive checklist system. The checklist for the hoist wasn't completed, but what really struck me about this is that there was an external audit system prepared by a reputable third party that probably many of you use, that had signed off that in fact the hoist was compliant and that everything was okay. There's a specific tick box in relation to the hoist, and it was ticked as being compliant. And I ran this case before Justice Curtis, so these words ring very much in my ears. This was what His Honour had to say about these things. He said the failures by Buildcorp were manifest. Buildcorp personnel on site were responsible for checking a hoist, despite having no experience operating or inspecting hoists and not holding certificates of competency. But the site-specific safety plan of Buildcorp required a qualified personnel project supervisor to check the working conditions of the hoist. Now, the hoist could only be operated by a qualified person. This is the kicker. I accept that Buildcorp had in place documented safe workings systems, which were on this occasion ignored and apparently not enforced. I accept also that the defendant's system required that their system were independently audited, and an audit performed before this accident at the request of Buildcorp wrongly recorded that only licensed persons were using the hoist. The circumstances in which that audit was conducted remain unexplained. Fundamentally, I hear a lot about you need systems, you need processes, you need paper, you need lots of paper, you need lots of audits, you need lots of paperwork, you need a paper trail. I hear that a lot, and I'm told repeatedly, which really amazes me as a lawyer, that I'm told that often by non-lawyers, that's the key to defending yourself in relation to cases. Well, here was the classic example of the system was there. It was a great system. And there was an auditing process, and audits were done. And the audits told the organisation there was nothing to see here. Turns out there was something to see here, and the system had failed. It had failed in two respects. One, it wasn't implemented, and secondly, the audits were deficient. And none of that could be deployed in aid of defending against a prosecution. In fact, it's raised as a concern on the part of the judge in relation to what is going on. The point here is not to say that you don't need systems. The point is not to say that you don't need audits. The point is that the substance of what happens on the ground is far more important, and far more compelling, and a far more persuasive as a defence than any documents or paperwork. Mere paperwork serves no purpose from a safety perspective and is plainly ineffective as a defence in relation to legal prosecutions. And I'll come to some of the themes falling out of all this in a moment. The second case is a different context. And the case really is a very sad case about an electrocution of a line worker in the process of bringing down what was believed to be a de-energized 11 kV volt conductor. Now, it was de-energized in that the low voltage conductor was de-energized. The top conductor wasn't de-energized. All that was in accordance with the relevant procedure. The conductor was on the ground. The worker went to pick it up. Unbeknown to him, 2 kilometres down the line, it had come into contact with the top conductor and became energized and sadly electrocuted him. Now, what's interesting about this is that, and I personally investigated this incident, what's interesting about this is what the judge says about it, and he recognizes that the workers involved did everything right. They followed the system. They followed the system to a T. They followed every bit of it. Everything they were required to do, they did. But what was missed is the fact that the system was defective in that the line could be energized if it came into contact further down the line with the top conductor. But after the incident, the observation was made that the high voltage conductor would be de-energized when that work is done in future. The point here is not to say that the system was deficient or not deficient. And you know, on this occasion, there was a 300,000 fine associated with that particular incident. The point here is that just having a system and enforcing compliance doesn't necessarily lead always to the right outcomes. The idea is to actually harness the resources of the workers and to better understand the risks in the context of which they operate. Blind compliance with the system is in certain circumstances a risky undertaking because it closes one's mind to the possibilities of risks that hadn't been anticipated by the system. And think about it for a second. It's almost impossible to anticipate all the variations and all the variables that could occur in any given circumstances. If that was possible, we could just develop an algorithm and a robot could do the job. The reality is we rely on a skilled workforce for most of what we do for good reason. And that skilled workforce is supposed to bring their skill and experience and expertise to the task of the risk assessment process and working out how the guidance that's provided by the rules can be applied in practice in a way that achieves safety and achieves a safety outcome. And it's not just merely an exercise in mere compliance. So those two, these are two of, and when Kim and I were talking about this, she said you must have hundreds of examples. I do. But these are two of my favorite examples. There are many other examples that are not case-based, but rather examples in practice. For me, what often gets missed is that the best legal risk minimization strategy that you can adopt it happens to be the one that prevents the deaths and serious incidents. For me, that has to be your starting point. Your starting point is that if you prevent the deaths and serious incidents, then the scrutiny in relation to legal liability largely falls away. All the talk of proactive nature of the legislation, in practice, the scrutiny only comes where there is an event that involves death, serious injury, or the potential for death or serious injury. And so focusing on system on those things becomes the best strategy you can adopt. The second thing that absolutely floors me is that people plan the system for their defense. And now think about that for a second. What you're really saying is that you are developing a system for its failure, not for its success. You are planning for the failure of the system. Now, in what other aspect of your business life do you do that? In what aspect of your business life do you plan you have the perspective of failure? You don't. You manage risks, but you plan for success. And so the system should be about accident prevention. It's not about developing a legal defense. Let the lawyers develop the legal defense. That's our job. That's what we get paid for, handsomely, I might add. So let us do our job in relation to developing a defense. You focus on developing the system that prevents the incidents from happening, and chances are you won't need the lawyers at all. Certainly won't need them in relation to defending you in relation to a prosecution. So this idea that you need a paper trail and documents, and you only need those things if they're going to further the safety cause. Even to the extent an audit helps you, that's great. Even to the extent a checklists help you, that's great. But in my experience, talking to workers, a lot of these systems go largely unread and unused, and the work goes on despite them, and goes on safely, and success is achieved despite the system, not because of it. And people then want to criticize workers for not following the system when things go wrong, not understanding that that's how things go right as well. And really, the system has been largely irrelevant to shifting the needle in relation to the safety outcome. What we're advocating is recalibrating the system so that it actually adds value to your organization. It doesn't just hang over you like a bureaucratic weight. Now, the point that I made earlier stands. So the law actually, in practice, requires very little by way of documentation and record keeping. It's about substance. Largely, it's a handful of sections of the Work Health and Safety Act that goes enforced, and we all know them. It's the duty of care of a person conducting business undertaking, and that's found in Section 19. A handful of other sections occasionally get rolled out, but for the most part, the law focuses on the duty of care. And the approach of the law is largely about letting businesses work out how to manage risks in their organisation, and working out how best to do that. There is nothing in relation to audits, nothing in relation to checklists, nothing in relation to JSAs. SWIBs are referred to, but only in limited circumstances. And so the reality is that a lot of the folklore around what the law requires is just that. It's just people's interpretation of what they think would be helpful to them. But if it's not helpful to safety, then and it's not a legal requirement, then you've got to ask yourself, why are you doing it? Now, I'm not an advocate of throw out the system, throw out all the rules. I absolutely don't believe that. What I'm saying is you've got to declutter rules to reflect things that are helpful to people rather than things that get in the way of people doing their work. So the point is not to throw away all the rules. The point is to reduce the volume of documentation to something that is workable, useful, something that people would actually refer to and look forward to referring to it because it's going to help them do their work. And if it helps them do their work, if it speaks to them, if it gives them guidance where they need it, then it is a very useful thing to do. And the same is true of audits, by the way. Audits can be very helpful if one engages in the audit in the right way, and be less about policing and checking up on people, and more about getting insights. And we'll get to how you shift that approach, look at it differently in a moment. Of course, it won't be called audits, but essentially what you're trying to do is be helpful in your engagement with workers. And the final point is the point that I made in relation to the essentials energy case. Checklist compliance culture, it might actually get in the way. It reduces, and this is what the research shows. When you got an expert and you confine them within a very narrow set of rules that they have to follow, you're not tapping into their expertise. They become mindless. It reduces mindfulness. The best way to get the most out of people is actually to harness their expertise and switch on their brains when they're doing the work, and that necessarily requires trust. That necessarily requires an investment in knowledge and capability. It means putting people at the center of your system and imagining work from their perspective and not from yours. It's not about your convenience. We are here to serve. We're not here for the benefit. We're not even here for the benefit of regulators. You've got to lose that mindset. I don't know of any single regulator that has the mindset that your system is there for their benefit. Why have we adopted that perspective, or why would you ever accept the idea that the convenience or the assurance of a regulator should be your perspective in anything that you do? Let me finish off the slide by saying this. If I said to you that there was a law out there that imposed 25 years imprisonment in relation to gross negligence conduct, and that you engage in activities every single day that could expose you to potentially to that liability if you get things wrong. What would you do? Would you have checklists? Would you have manuals? Would you have audits? Would you have supervisors? I want you to reflect that and think about what would you do? Would you double down on bureaucracy? The reality is that law exists. It's called the Crimes Act. It exists in every jurisdiction. You face the potential for 25 years imprisonment when you drive a car, and there are more people who have been jailed for offences, manslaughter offences relating to driving a car and causing death, and none of us would have the checklists, the manuals, the supervision, the audits. What we have are reasonable precautions that we use, the things that make it safe for us to engage in that activity. We don't think about it from the perspective of liability. We don't think about it from the perspective of the regulator. We don't think about it from the number of years in jail that you could do. What you do is you approach it on the basis that you don't want to kill or injure people when you're driving a car for very good reason, unrelated to your legal liability, and you do it to the best of effort. And that needs to be the recalibration of the safety approach. Kim.
Excellent, thanks, Michael. There's so much information. There's that case law, like you said, you've got hundreds of it available at your fingertips. Is so rich in data to add into your compelling case for change. And there's just so many. There's a multitude of points people could draw on from that previous slide. So the second step then in the roadmap is to set a vision, a mandate, and get sign-off from your stakeholders. And what can really resonate with your stakeholders is this idea of taking an evidence-based approach to safety, because when you think about it, a lot of the ways in which we approach safety comes from ideas that just seem like a good idea. Yet, even though we have that sort of dogma that comes up in safety, we have at our fingertips as safety professionals a wealth of research that is peer-reviewed, it's empirical, it's published, and it's there for us to help inform us in the best way to get bang for your buck, if you like, and really make a difference in relation to safety. So a good example of that is safe spine, which is that stretching activity that we do before work to reduce manual handling injuries. How many people have actually looked into the efficacy of those types of approaches? So someone came to me once, they said, Kim, manual handling injuries, we need to reduce them. Let's do this. I said, hang on a second, let's look at the research behind that. And I was quite shocked to find that there was zero efficacy behind that particular initiative. And what we know works from the research is what we call participatory ergonomics. So that's an evidence-based approach. But often we don't really take the time to look at the research underpinning it. So my encouragement would be, as you take this mandate or vision to your stakeholders, is to really propose that going forward, we're going to take an evidence-based approach. A more accurate approach based on the wealth of research that's available to us, and one that reflects the true state of safety. But and so we've got a few points here that you could draw on, that you might like to add to that mandate and that vision for your stakeholders, which is this idea that going forward, we're going to proactively, and Michael will touch on the importance of that word as we go through the presentation, proactively look at the existence and management of hazards and risks, incorporate positive performance indicators. So if your company's on the hook with TRIFR and LTIFR and you cannot get rid of it, even though we've got some pretty compelling reasons why we would shift away from it, at least expand out the safety conversation to include positive performance indicators. We can present a more balanced picture of the capacity and the resilience of an organisation. We can measure safety capital, and we can harness workers as a resource. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a very highly compelling mandate that an organisation would probably pretty willingly get behind and sign off on. Now, a bit of a trap for young players is that, in my experience, your executive will like what you're proposing. Many might come to you and say, look, I strongly welcome this. This is a breath of fresh air. This is exactly what I've been thinking and wanting to implement. However, there may be some parts of your business that might be extremely concerned about what you're proposing. It might just be so far removed from the traditional safety paradigm that they've already have. And what they might come to you and say is look, we're really concerned that this will compromise the legally defensible position that the organisation has. So it's going back to those points Michael made before about how we view and structure the system, thinking it's going to protect us from a legal point of view. So my strong suggestion, having had that said to me quite a few times, is do not ignore that objection when it comes up. So I would instead embrace those concerns and paste those objections out in your compelling case for change and in your mandate for sign-off. And the way we can do that is by successfully demonstrating to the executive and the board, demonstrate to them that this approach, the Safety 2 approach, is the best for ensuring their due diligence obligations. So my experience and my learning going forward is to anchor everything back to the due diligence obligations, because that really produces that ironclad argument for your stakeholders and provides a really nice way to anchor it back to. So I'm going to pass back to Michael to talk us through those due diligence obligations, which we all know, but talk about them in the context of this change that we're proposing.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kim. I just want to say one word. We've mentioned safety capital a few times. It's an important concept. It's near and dear to my heart. I've advocated for that for quite some time now, for about 15 years. The reason that it's important for you to actually measure the return on your investment in relation to safety is because you start then talking to the executive in the same language they talk about other things. If we stop thinking about safety as an expenditure, it becomes less vulnerable in circumstances of a downturn. It becomes a less about a nice to have and more fundamental to the way you do business, which it must be. It absolutely must be not about safety being separate from business, but rather an integral part of doing work. Now, in terms of what Kim was referring to, this is one of the things that actually I find very interesting. A lot of the prominence of TRIFR and other negative performance measures has really driven out of the fact that many organisations, although for some time boards and directors of boards and executives of organisations have had personal liability provisions that's been part of the fabric of the legislation for quite some time now. And there's been a lot of case law around that. Really, the introduction of the due diligence proactive duty has now become something that that has brought safety very much to the boardroom and the front of mind of executives and of boards. And indeed, another wave of that, in my experience, has been industrial manslaughter. A lot of people have, again, done more of a deep dive in relation to safety because of the risk of industrial manslaughter and the potential additional legal consequences associated with safety as a result of that, and I expect that will continue. The elements of due diligence are these. It's firstly to acquire knowledge in relation to work health and safety matters. That really is about gaining a basic understanding of the work health and safety and principles of work health and safety. It's secondly gaining an understanding of the nature of the operations and the risks associated with the operations. And here you're really trying to actually understand how safety relates to your business and what happens on the ground in relation to your operations, is to ensure there are adequate resources and processes for discharging those obligations and managing those risks. So it's actually making sure that the resources are available and ready for use when they are needed. And again, all of those things, if you just notice, the second and the third element I've just talked about are really about things as they happen in practice. The fourth obligation is monitoring the performance of the organisation in terms of incidents, hazards and risks, and respond in a timely manner to that. Notice it's not about just incidents, about hazards and risks. It's ensuring legal compliance, ensuring that the organisation complies with the express obligations that it has, and notification requirements, consultation. All of those things are part of the things that enable the system to work. And then finally, verifying that those things are in place and implemented. Now, one of the things that we try and work with people on is actually to understand how best do you do that. And actually, a lot of the things that we're now deploying as tools to help us do that don't talk to any of those elements. They don't relate to any of those elements. They would largely reporting to boards and executives using TRIFR and other lag indicators. We're reacting to those data points, and that seems to be leading the conversation in relation to safety. The conversation is very much about assurance. It's not about substance. It's largely about counting of incidents rather than actually promoting safety outcomes. And so what we've tried to do in the work that we've done is really recalibrate the way you report to a board in relation to those things. We'll come back to the due diligence index, and it's a collaboration that Kim has been one of the pioneers on, as well as a number of other organisations that have piloted the index. And a bit of a plug to the index before we move past the slide. The index is an open source index. It'll be available for free. It's an initiative by a number of people, collaboration between Clyde & Co. and Work, Sydney Decker, Kim, both in her role at Serco and previously at Urban Utilities, and a number of her colleagues at Urban Utilities, at Transgrid, at Brisbane Airport Corporation, at Hanson Yuncken, at Cube, and Horizon also. I'm sure I've missed somebody, and I apologise if I have, but all of those organisations have collaborated in developing this particular index, in testing various versions of it, and we're delighted to actually bring you something that we believe works and that will take your organisation forward in relation to the conversation in terms of promoting safety outcomes and the state of safety rather than the absence of safety incidents.
Thanks, Michael. So from in talking about the due diligence and in anchoring it back to due diligence strategically, the next phase in that roadmap is to then go ahead and create what we call the tactics or the tactical initiatives, the tools, the frameworks that can be used in operational day-to-day work by your leaders, by teams, by HSRs and the like. So my suggestion then would be is to, I don't want to make it sound really easy because there's a lot of work that goes into this, but there are so many companies, as Michael said, who are well on their way with rolling these tools out. So you're not on your own in building them out. There's a lot of resources that you can draw on and consultants that certainly can help you with building this stuff out. But certainly it's really about developing, implementing and embedding these key tactics that operationalize the principles. Now, I've listed out a few here. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list. There's probably another 5 I could add to it, but really the key ones that you might like to consider building out and rolling out in your organization in order to then aggregate that data upwards to the due diligence index are listed there. So learning teams, work insights, decluttering, your legal compliance audits, and also just culture as well. I think I slipped that one in there, Michael, because that's a favourite of mine. So what this looks like practically then is decluttering that pointless bureaucracy that Michael discussed before that we think that we need, but there's actually no legal requirement to have. So decluttering that from our safety management system. That certainly isn't just removing things and making documents slimmer, not at all. It's about aligning the work as imagined with the work as done. It looks like moving from that fixation on LTIFR and TRIFR to actual positive performance indicators that are very rich in data and are meaningful to help us fulfill those due diligence obligations. It looks like aligning expectations to work as done through the work insights process. replacing surface investigations with investigations that instead foster trust and uncover the real story of operational work. And having used learning teams for years, I often get guys walking out of a room saying that was the best investigation I've ever been involved in. Okay, and it's and you know, we've got all this data about how we can go about improving systemic contributing factors, and shifting from very much from a blame culture to a culture of trust. So I certainly wouldn't pick off all of these at once. Depending on your appetite, your company's appetite, and on your resourcing, I would certainly get started on learning teams and work insights, and start to declutter areas when you can. And then as you start to embed these tools and tactics, and as they start to mature, the data can then be brought together to form the due diligence index. Now, I'm not going to go into too much more detail about these tools here, because if you just if you were to Google them, if you were to listen to you know, other presentations throughout this conference, then you'll certainly get more information on them. Amanda's and Mark's presentation was a great one on understanding how to approach work insights also. So I'm going to leave that one there and pass over to you, Michael, to discuss how we can now bring it all together with this due diligence index, which really is the linchpin of the roadmap. So back over to you. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I'll just add one point. The point of the legal compliance audit is not to add to the bureaucracy burden. Sometimes people get scared of that. It's actually part of the assurance process in relation to decluttering. And certainly when Kim and I have worked together, that has been quite a powerful reinforcer, that once you declutter, you've got to make sure that what you have actually complies, because that's the first thing that people are going to ask. And in fact, a part of the decluttering is asking the question, is there a legal reason why I have this? And you know, invariably the answer is no. And so that to me is hand in glove, part and parcel of the exercise. Now, in terms of introducing the concept of the due diligence index, as I said, it's a collaboration between Clinico, Art of Work, and all the individuals that I mentioned, and organisations I mentioned before. I'm keen for us to better understand how one can actually deploy measures that more closely mirror each of the elements. And the thinking behind it has been really trying to go first principles in relation to this approach, looking at each of the elements, trying to develop a measure that most closely predicts or assists in measuring the adherence to each of those elements, and then by building on those, developing a way in which you can develop an index, a number that you can report on, record. In effect, what we have is 6 different numbers for each of the elements that combine together to give you one holistic number, which is the due diligence index. Now, why was it important for this to be a number? It was important for this to be a number because the feedback from boards is that they need a comparable, benchmarkable measure. You know, a lot of people in the Safety 2 community are going to push back in relation to the idea that you need a number. You absolutely need a number if you want to talk to boards. And you need a number that is comparable and benchmarkable if you want to talk to boards. Boards are made up of non-executive directors that sit on various boards. They want to be able to go from one organisation to the other and have a meaningful way of comparing it. Now, at the moment, TRIFA has the appearance of being exactly that. That's its attraction. Its pull and attraction is in having the appearance of being useful as a comparable number from organisation to organisation. Of course, it's not a defined, consistently defined measure. We'll talk about the difficulties. It is not a statistically reliable measure. You know, some people include contractors, other people don't include contractors. Some people, the rate itself varies between regions of the world and what standard you are using, and then it's susceptible to manipulation. What we've tried to do is develop something that is more meaningful, that avoids some of those traps, and we've included what those elements are in subsequent slides. But just one, the people on this, the audience of this conference will very much appreciate this. The idea that TRIFR gives you an indication of anything. I mean, I talk about to boards about zero LTI as being a meaningful measure of alarm. If you have a period of prolonged zero LTI, this is the moment you panic and you start actually asking very hard questions, because it's anecdotally a reliable indicator of an impending disaster. So far from being an indicator of good safety performance, historically, when people have had a prolonged period of zero LTIs, it has been the moment before the calm, before the storm, where they've had a disaster. And certainly, all of the BP cases, not to pick up BP, Exxon, all of the Longford, all of the high-profile incidents that we talk about as safety practitioners, and the folklore stories that we tell, all have had periods of prolonged zero LTIs. And so it really is alarming to think that people are relying on TRIFR as an indicator of the state of safety or of safety performance. And in that respect, I think we need to certainly dim the light in relation to the use of those indicators. Now, we say dim the light, we don't say stop measuring them. Why? Because you'll get a lot of pushback in your organisation if you stop measuring them, in our experience. We say provide other things that people can measure, track, and stop reacting to TRIFR results. Certainly remove all the incentives in relation to TRIFR results, and you need to do that urgently. We'll talk about a couple of cases that tell you that is absolutely necessary. But what we know is that statistically speaking, it is not a meaningful measure. What we know is that it is prone to manipulation. What we know is that it is merely counting incidents, which may tell you nothing about the state of safety. Having low TRIFR doesn't mean that you're safe, and it tells you nothing about the state of safety if TRIFR is high, other than you've had incidents. And depending on what those incidents are, that may tell you something. But without further analysis, it tells you nothing. One thing that always struck in my mind was one powerful presentation by a mining executive at a mining conference, where they said, "Hey, this is our record. This is our LTI for the past 5 years, and this is an LTI. This is another LTI. This is another LTI. Aren't we great?" And then they said, "There's only one problem. All those LTIs were fatalities." And so, in a sense, we need to actually start to adjust our thinking in relation to what we're measuring. Now, here are 3 case studies which show the fact that measuring TRIFR is not much of an indicator. And in fact, has been identified in reports as being one of the examples or root causes of what went wrong. BB Texas Refinery, people know all about that. Esso, Longford. There's also a study in relation to Australia Post, which again identified the incentive to manipulation of TRIFR rates associated with linking TRIFR with incentives. There are many other examples, and actually, when the Macondo incident went through the courts, the people who went to jail because of obstruction. People who in the US have gone to jail for safety incidents have gone to jail because of fraud in relation to manipulation of TRIFR data, and the US has no personal liability provisions in relation to OSHA, as they call it, offences. So what we encourage people to do is to start to reconsider their approach in relation to this. So these are the elements that we are promoting or using as
the due diligence index. We're encouraging people to adopt these measures. Each and every one of these measures will have a definition, a strict definition, and if you adhere to those measures, then you're measuring DDI. If you're measuring something else or manipulating the measures, you're not measuring DDI. And so what we're trying to do is create a community of people who are measuring safety in the same way, who are sharing data, who are sharing learning, and over time, if an element needs adjustment and we need a version 2 of due diligence index, we're absolutely open to that. But what we want people to do is to start thinking about things from the perspective of these measures. So for the first element, we've chosen worker insight experience, and what we've done is weigh that up in relation to trying to calibrate that against the experience both from the worker perspective and also the person conducting the worker insight. We have looked at working teams, learning teams rather, for the second element, and using a measure associated with that to try and refine the use of that based on hours in conducting teams, recognising that a single deep dive might be just as valuable as a number of superficial dives. We've tried to look at the delta between the resources where they're needed and the resources that are provided as a measure of the resource element. We've tried to look at monitoring in terms of reviews done, and we've tried to look at it's inevitable that legal compliance is part of this because it is actually one of the elements, and we've tried to look at safety net promoter score as the verification component, which actually allows people to give feedback in relation to how they view safety in the organisation. We believe those 6 elements and the number that they provide will give people a good indication of the state of safety in their organisation, and over time will drive the right behaviours and the right resourcing and the right approach that has workers at the centre of the equation, and not a problem to manage, control, or solve. Now, Kim, your experience in this will be hugely valuable in terms of how you've seen that operate in the organisations you've been part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. So my experience in rolling out the due diligence index, it really changed the narrative in the boardroom and with the executive. Before, I found the narrative was quite, it was quite narrow and quite small because we really are only focusing on these 2 metrics that we expected us to tell so much more to us, but they just weren't. And, we'd be gleaning out all this information that was really just, it's almost like fairy dust, So then, in shifting to the due diligence index, by applying this roadmap, by building out those tools, by having that data, it gave all leaders in the business so much more to scrutinise and to talk about and to be proactive about, which I believe really put us in a much stronger, better position and made our safety approach so much more robust. So my strong encouragement for everyone on the call today, if you're listening intently and really curious about how to apply the due diligence index, is just to start somewhere. Even if you're starting somewhere small, if you want to start big, great, but take some elements out of that roadmap that Michael and I have proposed and have a go at it. Every organisation is different. It's not an easy task, we know that, but we 100% feel it's worthwhile. And as Michael posed that challenge almost to the industry, like if we all start measuring in this way, then we can really start to have comparable data, we can start to share information and grow it from there. So of course you're going to come up against complexity, you'll come up against assumptions from a traditional safety paradigm, you'll come up against entrenched attitudes from board members or other leaders, from safety professionals. So it really isn't for the faint-hearted, but I really encourage everyone to take the opportunity, because it really is worthwhile. And as we talk about, safety is an ethical responsibility that we have to the people at the front line, not a bureaucratic accountability. So I think together, if we share our learnings, we can make a huge difference in our industry. And so I really encourage people to get out there, read the paper that's been published by Michael and Sydney, and give it a go, because we believe it really will give a more accurate measurement of the true state of safety in an organisation. So big thank you to Paul, Katie, Elliot, Michael, my co-presenter. Michael and I, it was a real pleasure for us to work together to present this to everyone. So we really hope it's been useful. So thank you so much. Elliot, I think we're passing back to you for some questions if we've had any come through.